Anyway, okay. So we're at Nun Hey Amud Aleph, the new the Mishnah. We're going to start a clean slate of going back somewhat to our discussion, but not completely, when we talked about Ono and Shtus. So the Mishnah begins about a third, a little bit more, a third down. Ono arba kesef. So it repeats the obvious that Ono, a fraud, price fraud, is 4 pieces of kesef out of 24, meaning shtus, as Rashi explains, when Rashi says ono arba kesef lemekach sela kedamin dahavale shtus, because the four pieces of silver is 1/6. And of course, remember the machlekes. If it's exactly a 6, it's a machlekes whether you can't or can't cancel it. Certainly, if it's a smidgen above, you can, and a smidgen below, you can't. But nevertheless, 1/6 is what gives the buyer the right to either cancel or get that money back. Meaning that those 4 sela that are the 6, he can be repaid and the deal can go forward, or you can say no. As sometimes happens when you get cheated, you say, I don't want to deal with this person. This person's now kind of has no nemanis. It's not trustworthy. So many times in business, and we've all seen it, I've seen it, of course, is that there is a sort of a bad feeling that, oh, you overcharged me. Now what else am I going to be into in the future? And I don't want to deal with you. So unfortunately, that triggers that. Yeah.
Excuse me. So today's commerce, I mean, this says 1/6 is the boundary for overcharging. Today, you have to have, for any kind of item, you have to almost have 100% markup in order to survive with a business. So how do we adjust today's commerce based on the 1/6?
So I think the perspective is that it's 1/6 above what is the standard. In other words, if 100% markup is what is the standard, and let's just accept that for a moment, then that's what the world charges. But if you go a shtus, a 6th above that, that's what the shtus is. So, but you're right, you have to establish what the market is. And unfortunately, maybe you're right. Maybe 100% is what has to happen, because short of that, yeah, Menashe.
Well, so 100% what you just said, but in addition, a lot's going to depend on the item. I think the idea that also, we have different kinds of things in different sorts of markets. When you have something that's a very simple product, it might be that the straight up markup is like 10% or something.
Right.
But then again, it will be a 1/6 over whatever the normal straight up amount is. There are other things where there's a lot of work involved, where you're not paying the person as an employee. It's getting built into the cost. And therefore, there's going to be a lot of markup in that sense, even though you look from an accounting standpoint, it might not be quite that way, but effectively it is, because this, this vendor buys this thing for $1, but they have to paint it, or they have to do this, they have to do that, and they're selling it for $5, but everybody's selling it for $5, so that's okay.
But we never heard that kind of a definition of what the price was in the Mishnah or the Gemara.
Well, the Gemara never. It's interesting because we didn't come across any discussion in the Gemara about how you establish the price. So the establishment of the price is something we're sort of subsuming into our discussion, that price is a proper price because that's what the world charges. In other words, we're not saying, oh, he gouged in the price already, now he wants another shtus on top of it. Clearly, that would not be acceptable. But we're only saying that whatever the price is, a shtus is the catalyst for either canceling the deal or getting back. So in other words,
so there's an assumption that the market price would be embedded in the words of the Gemara, that the market price is the starting point, but it was never laid out clearly, and that's
correct.
Something that was missing, I think, all along.
So your question is the market price already a profit, and now there's another 1/6 or a little less than a 1/6 on top of what is the profit already? I think maybe that's what your concern is is that in the market price, there's already a profit. So what are we talking about a shtus if he's already made his money in the markup, right?
Right.
Right.
I mean,
So,
an interesting thing I think about in modern world today, something that you could easily compare: milk. Okay, you could have the same gallon of milk. I mean, it's a different package, but it's 2%, not Chalav Yisrael, but with a hasher, etc. Standard milk, the same milk you buy anywhere. And at Costco, it's $2.69,
it's
and at
literally
Giant,
50% less. Yeah.
right, and
Yeah.
at Giant, it's $3.99, and maybe at 7-Eleven, it's even a little bit more. And other places, it's in between. Shalom's, when it's on sale Monday, Tuesday, it's less, and it's in between, and so on. And so you have a wide variety of prices for a gallon of refrigerated standard milk.
Right.
And so the question is, what level, maybe that 7-Eleven price would be considered overcharging because it's more than a sixth, more than the average price, and then
Yeah.
everybody else, as long as they're within a sixth plus or minus. I don't know whether they even would be within a sixth, but within that certain range, then it would be fine. But that there's a certain point where you say, oh, that's too much.
My question is, why was it left out from all the discussions and all the learning?
Right.
They don't have a basic definition of what's the starting.
What the price. And part of that may be, Jay, because we're looking at through the lens of our modernity, where, as Menashe just pointed out, you may have 5 different prices of milk from 5 different competitors. That didn't exist in the time of the Gemara. In the time of the Gemara, you didn't have a 7-Eleven, a Costco, a Giant, a Shalom. You had basically one entrepreneur or one business that had that. So it was far less complicated and much easier to sort of penetrate and see, okay, what's the cost, what's the profit, etc. So in a way, we're trying to understand something in today's world that really it maybe doesn't translate from the time of the Gemara when we're reading about Ono and what it is. So I think at face value, we have to say that we're dealing with a price that is established. Everybody understands that, let's say, this carton of milk is a shekel, whatever. And now, on top of that, there should be a profit, because otherwise, you're right. Why are we not getting into this more detailed? What's the cost? What it is? Now, if there was a competitor in the time of the Gemara, someone who came and said, "Okay, I want to compete with this local merchant, so that there'll be options." Then again, I mean, I'm sure that whether the Beis Din, whoever, would look at the numbers and basically come up with a number that is the fair price for which a sixth is the right profit.
So why didn't they at least establish that the cost of the product to the shopkeeper should be the starting point? The wholesale,
It's assumed. It's
whatever
assumed.
whatever he pays, he's allowed so much above that for sale.
I think, Jay, that's assumed. I think we have to say that the assumption is that what the Gemara is talking about and the understanding is, and even when the Torah says that you should not, price gouge, that what you just said, that there's an established price in the market that we can all agree that's the right price, and then you build up the shtus on top of it. I mean, that's the only way to look at it, because otherwise, Eila Davar Sof, you can always ask the question. I mean, the Gemara isn't going to establish a price and say, oh, the price of milk is a shekel, and therefore you should. It's assumed that the price is what everybody agrees the right price is, and now you're entitled to a shtus. Unlike today, where the marketplace is free and dictates everything, and there's no such thing as a shtus. I mean, one company's making, again, one company makes it on volume. They may make it on a penny, and another doesn't have volume, so they want to make it on on multiples. And it's a free market society, so anybody can do what they want. Now, maybe in a restricted economy where under totalitarian or communist or whatever, it's a lot harsher. You can't just make up the number and say, this is what I want. This is what
I'll just ask one more point.
Yeah.
Somebody has a scoring store.
Yeah.
And he wants to calculate what the shtus would be. And he says, look, I'm paying so much for the distributor of Art Scroll. and I have so much overhead in the building
Right.
just to pay rent and so on.
Employment and
So
rent,
that's my
yeah,
total cost, and then I'm allowed a sixth, the shtus,
correct.
over profit. Is that what he would do today?
Yes, exactly right. If someone was Ehrlich, that's exactly what he would do. He would go through the numbers and be very, very careful and say, I want to be careful because I don't want to price gouge. So he should be fair to himself. I mean, he shouldn't shortchange himself, but at the end of the day, he'll come up with a number that says, this is my total cost. And my cost is, like you say, rent and overhead and electricity and labor, etc. And then they'll have a number, and from that you build shtus.
Rabbi,
Okay.
sometimes you have an inflation that's going up. That like we're living in an area where there's thousands of people, tens of thousands, and you have more than one store. Now, let's say one store can't obtain it from the local, so you have to go to, let's say, New Jersey to bring in milk.
Right.
Well, now you're going to have that added a price of the transportation in. Of course, it's going to fluctuate, but that means they have to change that price. Sometimes it may get over the 6%, and sometimes it may drop below.
No, but to your point, if someone is competing but has a higher base because he has to import it from New Jersey or whatever the case may be, then he's still collecting a shtus, even though it's a higher number than the other guy, because his basis is higher. If your basis is higher than mine, then your shtus end number will be higher than mine, but it won't necessarily be gouging because you're still at a shtus from what your cost is. And then it'll be a price competition of someone. Why should I buy from you when you import it from New Jersey when I can get it cheaper from somebody who gets it from suburban Maryland? So why should I pay the higher number, even though it isn't shtus, even though it isn't violating shtus, but you have a higher basis. So either you're going to have to cost cut or somehow convince people that your quality is better or whatever, but you're going to be at a concern. You're going to be at a deficit dealing with someone who has a lower overhead, lower cost. Even though the shtus is alike, neither of you are gouging.
That's not correct all the time because, for example, you have plenty of milk right now. You can get it every day you want. All of a sudden there's a milk shortage here or whatever it is. You got a frost, they don't have straw or hay or whatever they need to eat. Now you have to bring it in. Well, now you, meaning the first person that's selling it at a reasonable price, tomorrow he doesn't have any. Now you're going to come to me to get it. Well, I'm bringing it in from New Jersey. I've been consistent in bringing it in.
It's supply and demand.
Exactly.
The shtus doesn't change. It's the cost, the legitimate cost that a person has if he's Ehrlich and saying this is my cost and I'm entitled to a shtus. And that can fluctuate from day to day, week to week, product to product. It all doesn't. But as long as the person is adhering to the rules of what shtus is, that his number is his number. And and if he has to defend it in Bezdin, he'll defend it in Bezdin.
Right. So where the interesting question comes in, let's take the milk example. Let's say that the farms that are supplying most of the area have some have some problem. Okay. And in the meantime, one guy's getting his milk sourced from one particular farm. Maybe it's in the next state over. The transportation's a little more, but he builds it normally into the cost, but it's not too extreme. And that farm's doing fine. So he's under contract to that farm. So he has all the milk they want. That farm's costs haven't changed. They could sell it to him at the same price they've been selling. He's going to continue selling it at his price. And all of a sudden, instead of his price being 20 cents a gallon above most of the other places, but still with well within a sixth, now all of a sudden everybody else has to go up $1 because they got to pay for shipping from New Jersey.
Right.
So the question is, could he raise his price because the market price has changed? Or does he have to stick to his existing price because even though he's going to sell out everything he can and that's it because he's a lower price now than everybody else because he's got his standard markup and stuff and shouldn't be charging more than
that's a really fascinating question, and I don't want to answer it because in real life, if a case like that came before the Bezdin, I'm not sure if the Bezdin wouldn't say that to be Ehrlich, you should only do a shtus of what you are actually costs. But since the market is so
Distorted,
volatile,
yeah.
and tomorrow you may be in the same position as the other fellow that may be in that particular circumstance, and you always. Besdin always looks at the circumstances of the particular case. There's no generalization. Oh, for you it's a shtus here, for him it's a shtus there. They have to look at the whole picture. And Rabbi always used to say is that the same situation with two different people, the halacha can be different. So I'm not going to go and say, based on your example, Menashe, that he can't raise his price, even though for him it costs less, but he can't raise his price because the competition hasn't raised the price, has raised the price, and therefore he should rise along with them. That's going to be a halacha question that's going to be very specific to the circumstance, and it's very nuanced. So it's a good question, and there isn't. I don't see a distinctive answer. I think it's going to be best based on what Besdin will view in the marketplace, because you're going to explain your situation. You're going to say, yes, I have this, but my supply ends in a week, and then I'm going to be subject to everything else. Can I do this and maybe not rise to the level of all the others, but maybe let me raise my number, even though I'm not paying more now, but let me raise my number a little bit so that it's still within the shtus, but not where the other guy is. Again, this is a very complicated commercial question, al pi halacha, and that's why Besdin has to weigh in on these things. It's not that simple.
Could he raise the price over his 6% because of the fact that I'm always selling it a little bit higher because I have to spend more to bring it in, but you're selling it lower because you have a local, but I'm sort of looking ahead where you might not be able to accommodate.
Right. That's exactly the point. Yeah, that's exactly the point. Yeah.
I'm having somewhat of a hardship now because I'm not making what your percentage that you're making as a local. I'm paying an extra nickel or whatever it may be to bring it in that distance. But, and I have also a loss because if the first person is selling it for a lower price, I have milk that I can't get rid of. I'm losing a lot because it's now getting spoiled. So I have to recoup. I have to include into my spoilage the amount that I'm losing and add that for my future, what I'm capable of selling to break even for the expense that I need at the end of the week, let's say.
So he also has a replacement cost to refill his refrigerators next week. It's going to go up. And well, anyway, so
I think what everybody is saying really goes to the heart of why this is such a complicated question, even though on the surface it's a shtus, is for everybody who weighed in and said what they said, it's absolutely correct. So each circumstance has to be evaluated specifically for that circumstance. You're right about spoilage, and you're right about price rising, and you're right, and the competition. Again, a lot of this may not have been so detailed in the time of the Gemara, so maybe there wasn't all of this, back and forth. But obviously the halacha hasn't changed, so you have to extrapolate to modern times with all of the conditions that we deal with, and that's why you have to go to Besdin. I mean, if you go to a secular court, you're not going to get necessarily that same perspective. But when you go to Besdin and Besdin applies the halacha, then and Besdin, I've seen this in cases that I'm aware of where Besdin applies the halacha, and what would seem to be the right answer, al pi Besdin, isn't the answer, because Besdin looks at it a little bit different. And then, of course, Besdin gets criticized. They didn't do right. They didn't do wrong. Whatever. But this is what makes halacha so complicated, and why we have we have those who have yora are really dealing with orach chaim issues. But once you deal with business issues, then you're already into the realm of yadin, and that's far more complicated in a way, because the laws of business are they're very difficult. They're very difficult. In any event.
Wait, one last, Rabbi, one last thing. If I want to charge 8% and you're willing to pay it, is that fine, or is that not?
In other words, if I come to you and I'm open and I say,
Right, I'm charging 2 cents more than the next person or 3 cents, but and I tell you, I have it. I have this expenses. And even though that, you could get it cheaper, I don't have any problem you get it cheaper, but I have it when you need it. Therefore, there's a security in that respect.
Right. So it would seem that if you articulate that and say, and again, maybe you even add another word. You say, look, this is what I need. Here's the reasoning, and therefore my return is going to be more than a shtus. In other words, with me, you're going to be, you know you're going to get it. You have all the benefits, but I have to, for my number, I'm going to be higher than a shtus, and I want you to know that so you can't come back to me later and say that you violated the principle of ono. I think if you did that up front, you can negotiate that, David. That's something that the two parties can agree, and because it's he can go somewhere else. As long as he can go somewhere else, then he'll recognize that with you, he's got a benefit, and I'm willing to pay for that benefit. That's a different situation, yeah. But you have to be upfront, and you have to be careful to say all the right things about why I'm collecting more than a shtus is because here's the reason.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So the first words of the Mishnah, Ona Arbekesa, fine. Okay. The obvious question, by the way, I'm going to get ahead of it because I'm not going to answer it now, is we learned this several blot ago. Before we diverted into Masasheni and all the other Kachim issues, we learned Ona Arbekesa. The Gemara is going to answer that question. Why are you repeating it here? Ha'ona arba kesef is not new to us. These first three words are the exact words that the Gemara gave us. I think in Memtes, Memtes or Nun, is when we went through the whole question of Ono. They said this. So put that in your back pocket because that's going to be a Gemara. The Gemara, and I want to read. We're going to learn the rest of the Mishnah and understand later when that question is asked, what the answer to that question is. Why are we repeating it? There is a reason, but at this point, it's obvious on the face of it that we already learned this portion. Okay, Vaita. So now, having said this, the Mishnah goes on and says, the Mishnah is going to give us several principles. The first one is the principle of shtus, which we know. The second principle is v'hatana shtei kesef. Right? That when one person makes a claim against another and wants to go to Bezdin, the minimum amount of the claim for which a shvuah has to be made is shtei kesef, two silver pieces. In other words, if the case doesn't involve, whatever the case is, if it doesn't involve two silver pieces, it doesn't reach the threshold. Example, today we have minimum thresholds in courts. In district court, it may be 15,000. In small claim court, it may be 5,000. In other words, you can't go into small claims court and says, I've got a $500 claim, I'm going to go. You would clog the courts. There would be it would be impossible. So the courts make a minimum, and they say, you want to come to court, we'll entertain you with all the costs and fees, but you have to have a minimum claim. Says the Mishnah, v'hatayna shtei kesef. And the minimum claim to go into this small claims court is 2 silver coins. Okay, fine. V'hahaydah shava pruta. And once again, we know that you can deny anything, but if an oath, if a shvuah is going to be part of the response, for instance, modeh b'miksos, if a person says, you're claiming 2 silver coins. Oh no, yes, I owe you a silver coin, or I owe you 1.5 coins, but I paid you the rest. Then the halacha is he swears and he doesn't have to pay. In other words, if I'm going to agree to pay you something and not the rest, I have to make a shvuah. What's that minimum amount that that you have to pay in order to make a shvuah? Says the Mishnah, then the minimum amount is a pruta. In other words, the minimum amount to make the claim is shtei kesef, but the haidah, the admission, has to be shava pruta. If I admit to less than a shava pruta, then there's no shvua. So what I admit to has to at least have a shava pruta, the value, which a pruta we know, and we're going to see in the Mishnah in a minute, pruta is the lowest valuation of a coin that still has cheshivas. All right. So is a penny in our society even a value today? As an example, maybe not. But in other words, the penny is the lowest coin in the realm. So the chayra, that should be the amount. But the point is that a pruta has to be in play in order for there to be a shvua. Okay, so those are the three principles that this Mishnah is articulating for us, right? And now the Mishnah wants to go on and say, since we talk about a pruta as a minimum, the Mishnah now says, Chomesh prutas hein, there are 5 categories where a pruta is the minimum in the situation, whatever it is. And the Mishnah will now list for us 5 cases where the pruta is the lowest common denominator. Without it, you don't have a case. What are they? So now the Mishnah lists them. Hahodah, shava pruta. If one is going to admit, I owe you some money, right? Then the amount of money that I owe you has to be worth a pruta. If I owe you less than a pruta, that's not a hahodah. That is not an admission. Again, no oath, nothing. There's no shvur. One example. One that we're all familiar with because it's out there, out front and center. Isha miskadeshes b'shava pruta. When you betroth a woman, then you have to give her the value of a pruta. What is a pruta? And without it, there's no kedushin. And in fact, as we all know, we've seen it in many weddings. Maybe if you're sitting too far back, you don't see the exchange where the person the Masada Kedushin, who is overseeing the wedding, is holding the ring. Someone gives him the ring. He asks the chassan, is this your ring, your own money? I mean, he wants to make sure that it's properly owned and not borrowed or whatever, leverage. And then he turns to the 2 Eidim. What are the Eidim there for? The Eidim are there to review and to attest that this ring is a shava pruta. And that's critically important, because if there's not an agreement that this is a shava pruta, then the Mekadeshes isn't the Mekadeshes. There's no wedding. There's no, nothing's going on. So again, that's a second case where the Mishnah says a pruta becomes important. A third case is vanahena b'shava pruta min hektish moal. If a person accidentally gets the benefit of hagdish, we learned this in our Gemara a week or two ago, that you have to be moal. Moal means that you have to return the value of what you inadvertently took, a chomesh and a carbon. So the question is, what are you basing the meila on? Again, there has to be a pruta in play, otherwise this whole thing falls apart. There's no meila, there's no carbon, there's no chomesh. So there has to be a minimum of a pruta in order for there to be a violation, inadvertent violation of hegdish. Then Mishnah goes on, v'hamotze shava pruta chayiv. You walk in the street and you see an object on the street and you pick it up. Are you chayiv to announce, I found such and such, and if there's an owner, give me a siman, or whatever the siman is that you make. Again, Mishnah says it has to be shava pruta. Now, if you see something in the street, if you're not sure, you go to the Rav, you go to, is this worth a shava pruta? Maybe it's not. Maybe you find a hairpin. A hairpin isn't worth a shava pruta. You don't have to announce it. It's not an item you have to be returned. It has to be returned. But if it has cheshivas of a pruta, then there is a mitzvah of hashavas aveda, and you have to announce it. And finally, what is the last of the 5? V'hagoyzlis chavera shava pruta. Even in theft, there has to be a shava pruta. If one person steals from another person, and he steals something that isn't worth a pruta, that's not gezel. There's no theft here. There's no return. There's no kefil. There's nothing. So again, these 5 head notes are what the Mishnah is telling us are the 5 cases where there has to be a minimum of a pruta. The Mishnah adds in the end, in the Sliach case of Hagozel as Chavero Shavapruta, Yolicheno Achrav Afilu Lamodai. It's a very interesting little catchphrase that, in other words, by Gezel, the halacha is that if I want to return Gezel, let's say I stole from someone, I have charata, and that person has sent out a PI to find me. Fine. The PI finds me, I say mea culpa, I made a mistake, here it is. Is that returning the Gezel? Halachically not. Why? Because by Gezel, you have to return it directly to the owner. You have to come back to the owner and say, I took your item, here it is back. That's the halacha. You can't return it through a shaliach. Says the Mishnah, the thief who now has charata and he admits his guilt and he wants to return it, he's got to chase that owner to Modai. In other words, if that owner moved to a far off place, the only way he relieves himself of the gezel is by finding the owner. That's how far Hashavas Gezela goes. Not the others. Hashavas Gezela, Hashavas Aveda, no, none of those. But by Gezela, we have a special circumstance where he has to, Modai, of course, is an example, where he has to go as far as Modai, wherever the guy goes, that's where he has to find him, and he has to repay him. Okay, says Rashi. So we said the first Rashi onar b'kesef, v'hatayna shtei kesef she'ein shvuas hadayonim. In other words, if a case comes to court, there's going to be a shvua. So the shvuas hadayonim, the dayanim, I'm going to make a shvua here. So he says, "She'ein shvuas hadayonim alatayna psucha mishtei ma'os kesef." There will be no case where the judges will invoke a shvua. She'itu shava shtei kesef yesh lo b'yadcha v'zeh yoda v'yez lodama mehem shava pruta, and then the other person will be modeh or will say shava pruta. So the response for shvua would be, once the case is already in play because you have shtei kesef, then shtei kesef is no longer the barometer. The barometer is shava pruta v'yechaper hashar or yoda hakol v'yichpa pruta. Then if the person says, oh, no, I only owe you this and not that, then the minimum that he has to owe is a pruta, that's the derivative of the case. But first you have to get the case in court. So to get the case in court, you have to have 2 silver pieces. Once the case is in court, then the standard is no longer shtei kesef, the standard is shava pruta. As long as there's a shava pruta in play, whether it's because he admits it or he admits more and that's what's left, whatever, there has to be a pruta to adjudicate. Let's say the guy admits, an example, shtei kesef, and there's 8 prutas in a kesef. So you have 16 prutas in shtei kesef, and the case is 16 prutas. Okay, then the fellow says, you know what? I realize I owe you that money. I owe you 14 prutas. I'm going to pay you 14 prutas. What's left? 2 prutas. Okay. Okay. So no, I'm sorry. He says I owe you 15 and a fraction, whatever the case may be. What's left that I owe you is not a pruta. In other words, I'm going to admit that I owe you the lion's share of this money, but I don't owe you everything, so I don't want to pay you everything. The upshot is that if he's made b'miktzas and the amount that's left owing is less than a pruta, there's no shvua. In other words, he pays him what he pays him, but there's no shvua, there's no carbon, anything, because you don't have that minimum standard of a pruta for which to have a final adjudication. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. In other words, the standard is shtei kesef, and after that, the minimum amount to stay in play is a shava pruta. Okay, so this is our Mishnah. So the Mishnah has given us a couple of head note halachas and given us 5 examples of what it is that you have to have a pruta. Okay, now, so says the Gemara.
It's like we don't have any questions.
What's that?
It's as if we don't have any. Your
As if
audience
we don't have
doesn't
any
have any questions.
Right. So right. So I would say hold the questions because they're all going to come in as an avalanche. All right. We have to. Let's go a little bit further. Rashi. Odor shava pruta. So the minimum is a pruta for him to be chayav b'shvua. Okay. Hamotze shava pruta. If someone finds shava pruta, in the case of Metzias, aval botzer merhachi lo. But less than that, there's no mitzvah of Shabbos Aveda. Kenamrinan ma'ashetavod mimenu pirish la'aveda she'ein bo shava pruta. So the mitzvah of Shabbos Aveda, which is an important mitzvah, is dependent on the valuation of the item. Again, if it's an item that you can't know how to value, you have to take it to the Rav, to the Bezin, and sometimes they'll say this item is not even worth a pruta. You don't have to make an announcement. All right. And now, what was the last case? The last case was Gezel, and the Mishnah said, said Rashi, Im Hodesh Nishba l'Shaker. The law havale kapara. In other words, if he falls falsely, he swore falsely. I didn't steal it, and then his conscience got the better of him, and he wants penance. The law havale kapara. There is no kapara at shechzenu liyadei mamish. He has to go face to face to the owner. V'lo l'shlucha. This is a very important halacha. K'diksiv v'nosan la'asher osham lo. In other words, we're asking him to man up. Okay, don't just sling into the night and get away with, oh, here it is, I apologize, blah blah blah. You've got to face the music. You got to go back to the guy, look him in the face, especially if he's a friend or you know him. How difficult is that? We know how difficult that is to go back and say, I stole from you. I didn't. I have kapara. I have very much regret, and I want to give it to you back face to face. That's the halacha. So if you don't do that, then there's no. You haven't returned the gzela, and that's on you. So we see how far the Mishnah comes to tell us that that's your responsibility. You have to go back and find the owner. Okay, so this is an interesting Mishnah because it tells us a number of things which, again, we knew about shtus, but all these other things are now new, and now the Gemara is going to go into this in greater detail. Frek the Gemara, the first kasha is the kasha that I raised at the very beginning of the Mishnah. Tanina Chana Zimna. We already learned this halacha, right? We learned the halacha several blots rig when we were talking about Anoah. The very first thing we said that Anoah is a shtus. So why is the Mishnah repeating this? I mean, the Mishnah doesn't repeat just for the sake of it. There's got to be a reason. Okay, so the kasha begs the answer. That a oinah fraud is 4 pieces of silver from 24 pieces, which is a selah. A selah is 24 pieces of silver. So 4 pieces of silver makes it oinah, and that's what we learned back a few blocks. So why is it being repeated? Okay, shtus l'mekach, and that's considered shtus l'mekach. So why is the Gemara telling us this now? So that's the head note question, and immediately we're going to answer. Okay, so says the Gemara, you know why we say it? Because atana shtei kesef v'hodah shel pruta it's b'chalei. Because in order for us to go into the discussion of what is the basis for a claim in Bezdin, shtei kesef, what is the basis for a shvua, moda b'miktzas, pruta, the Gemara is telling us, and this is important for us to understand in learning generally, is that sometimes we have to repeat something in order for us to understand the next step in the Gemara. Sure, the Mishnah could have started and said, Hatana shtei kesef v'hadosh b'pruta. The Mishnah could have said that, And it would have been, okay, maybe I understand it, maybe I don't. That in order to make a claim, you have to have shtei kesef. In order to keep the claim alive in shvua, you have to have a pruta. But the Mishnah is telling us that the best way to understand that is to introduce the question of price fraud, to tell us that if a person commits price fraud and wants to go to Bezdin, you can have price fraud with less than shtei kesef, can't you? Of course you can. You can have price fraud with less than 2 silver pieces. Says the Mishnah, if someone has a case for price fraud, then you know what the minimum standard is? Shtei kesef. And that's a logical transition, because now we're starting from Aleph, that there is a case of shtus. We're going to Beis. Oh, but that case of shtus needs shtei kesef. And then we're going to Gimel, that once you have shtei kesef and you want to have a meidim amiktis, you want to have a case, you have to have a pruta. There's a logical sequence to that, says the Gemara, which requires us to repeat what we already learned in the past. Right? In other words, the Gemara is giving us a seichel here, that this is the way you should learn to understand, not to go into the middle of a case and say, oh, shtei kesef is the minimum standard. Okay, then you're going to say minimum standard for what? What's the situation? You'll start asking questions. Says the Gemara, no, start from Aleph. We learned Aleph. We're not learning it for the purposes of Aleph. We're learning it for the purposes of Beis and Gimel. Right? That's the point here. That the whole point of repeating is to introduce Beis and Gimel, the shtei kesef and the pruta. That's a very interesting way of understanding learning, by the way.
It makes it consistent, so the whole story hangs together.
Right. Exactly right. I mean, do you want to start reading the story on chapter B? I mean, the second chapter. What happened to the first? What did I miss? So, as a practical matter, the Gemara is willing to say we're going to repeat so that the story is clearer, even though the A portion is already pretty clear. But for the context, we're going to repeat it. That's what the Gemara is telling us. Okay.
It's not a big crime. It's
Say
not
again?
a big problem to repeat.
Well, look at the first Rashi in the Gemara, and this will be instructive. Okay. V'nista nami oino pruta, kagon im hoya hamekach b'sheish prutas. So here we go. What happens if the whole transaction was 6 prutas? So the chomesh is 1 pruta. You don't even have shtei kesef to go to court. True? So the whole case would never arise. So again, it's necessary to take a step back and give us the complete picture so that we can build on step 2 and in step 3. And again, it's an important seichel that the Gemara is giving us to understand how to learn, is that you start with the whole, then you go to a portion, and then you go to the lower common denominator, which is the pruta portion of the discussion. Okay? So that's the answer. The answer is hatana shtei kesef v'hodar shabapruta. It's b'chalei. We need it in order to understand the next 2 parts. Correct the Gemara. Okay, nice answer. Honami tanina. We learned this too. You're telling me a chiddush about shtei kesef, right? And shabapruta. We learned that not here, but we learned it in Masechet Shavuos. The Gemara told us the same thing. What did the Gemara say in Shavuos? The Gemara says, Shavuos HaDayanim, the Shavuos HaDayanim, in other words, the Shavuah that the Dayanim impose when someone, let's say, is Modem Mixas, Hatana Shtei Kesef, Hadosh Pruta. That Mishnah in Shavuos said this very same words. That if you have Shavuos Dayanim, it didn't talk about Ono. There's no Ono in that Gemara. That Gemara is about Shavuos Dayanim. What can the judges impose by way of a Shavuah? And they say, you impose Shtei Kesef, has to have 2 silver coins as a minimum, and then there has to be at least a pruta in further discussions. So now we're back to the same question. So now the question is even more. In our Mishnah, we're repeating 2 things. Oino, and Shtei Kesef and Shava Pruta. We have two distinct Gemaras that tell us that. One here in Bava Metzia, which told us earlier that Oino is B'shtus, and then a Mishnah in Shavuos, which tells us that Shtei Kesef is a minimum and a Hedor Shava Pruta. So taken as a whole, we learned this halacha already. In other words, even though it's in another place, the Gemara is circular. It's not linear. So if it's circular, then and you ask me a question, and the answer is already in Shavuos, then the question was asked and answered. Why do I have to give you another answer? It was asked and answered in Shavuos. So this is what the Gemara is asking. We already learned this in Shavuos. Why do we have to learn it here? Okay, that's a really important question. So the Gemara gives a different answer. You know why we have to say this whole pisman, everything we've learned, is Seifa Isprichle. We need it for the Seifa. What's the Seifa? The Seifa of the Mishnah is the list of five that tells us what has to be Shava Pruta, right? The Mishnah enunciated 5 conditions where you have to have a Shava Pruta. So now the Gemara, we're going to see how this is going to answer. The Gemara wants to answer that we have to say all of this, repeat everything that we just learned. I know Shtei Kesef, Pruta, in order to understand the Seifa of the Chomesh Prutas, of the 5 Prutas, right? Okay, so what does that mean? So let's go back to it. Let's understand what it is that okay. Frank, the Gemara here. Okay, let's go back to Rashi first. Let's look at Rashi. So Rashi tells us, "Eino no laprutus, pachas meiser, shehu matbeya shel kesef." Okay, so there is no for prutus alone, right? Less than an iser. An iser contains 2 prutas. Shehu matbeya shel kesef. Begezel bepruta, l'chayva carbon shvua. So again, this is all part of what we have to, in order to have a shvua. So you have to have shtei kesef and a minimum of a pruta. Fine. Okay. So now let's go into this chamesh prutas. The Mishnah told us 5 cases where you have to have a minimum of a pruta. So now the Gemara says as follows: chamesh prutas hain. Okay, so there's 5 prutas, and we've listed them in the Mishnah. Okay, we'll just go over them quickly because we're going to see the discrepancy in a second. For the 5 prutas are hoidah. If you admit, you have to admit to a pruta. Or isha miskadeshes. Nana, if someone is nana from hagdish and you have to have meila, you have to have a pruta. If someone finds an object and has to have Shabbos Haveda, that has to be bepruta, and then Gezel has to be bepruta. Gezel has the extra condition, but nevertheless, Gezel has to have a pruta. Okay, those are the 5 in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, the list of nami hoino bepruta. The Mishnah just gave us 5 examples. Why is one of the examples not Oino? We started talking about Oino and saying, oh, Oino is Vishtus. Let's break it down. Can you have Oino if you don't have a Pruta? Of course not. So why is Oino, which is the main subject of our discussion, not heading that list of 5? Are the 5 random, or is there a reason for the 5? So the first kasha is, listen to Oino Pruta. Let Oino be on that list. And then you have either 6 or you knock one off. But why is that? That's the first question. And it's such an obvious question, is why that is not included. Right.
Yeah.
So we immediately get an answer. Omer Rav Kana. So Rav Kana says, Zoisoi Meres. This is the established law. He says, Ein oino leprutus. That oino can't happen when all you're dealing with is prutus. We understand. there has to be a much higher number for there to be oinah. So if you're dealing with oinah, you can't deal in prutus. We can deal in prutus if you have a Shabbos Aveda, or if you have a kedushin of a ring, or whatever. But oinah has to be a much higher number in order for the shtus to wind up being worthwhile in the case. So you can't start with a pruta. So the obvious answer, what's that, Jay?
So the baseline has to be a lot higher.
It has to be a lot higher, right?
Not
So
having a whole scene over
you can't include a no in this question because a no has to be at a much higher number in order for you to get to shtus. So that's a very interesting answer. That so he
but it's not obvious. It's not obvious that you couldn't have the onoa down at the low amount of money. The principle would still be there if you're operating down at a pruta level.
The principle, yes, but what Rav Kana just said is not universally accepted. So Rav Kana is giving an answer that onoa doesn't even come into the parsha.
Right.
Let's go one step weiter. The Levi Omar, and Levi says, he argues on the principle, Yesha no leprutus. There is oinah in prutus. In other words, he's arguing the very basic issue of whether you can have oinah in prutus or not. So Rav Kana says oinah is not included in the chamesh because you can't have oinah in prutus. Comes Levi and says, Yesha no leprutus. That you can deal just in pennies in prutus and still have oinah. Right? And I'll bring you a raya. And Levi taught in his brisa, because what Levi did, Levi took the brisa and the Mishnah are contemporary. So he took his brisas, which he learned, and collected them into what we now know as Tosefta. The Tosefta is a collection of brisas from another Man de Omar. So in his Tosefta, in his brisa, listen to what he learned. He didn't learn this. Chamesh Prutas Hay. He has a different version. His version is Oinah Pruta, right? That Oinah is with a Pruta. Right away, he has a different one. V'Hoidah Pruta, again, the same. The Kedusha Isha B'Pruta, the same. The Gezel B'Pruta, the same. The Yeshivas Dayanim B'Pruta. And for the Dayanim to convene a court is B'Pruta. So what is he omitting? He's omitting, because in our Mishnah, which we just recited again, he's omitting a Shabbos Aveda. He doesn't count a Shabbos Aveda, right? And he doesn't count. He does count.
No, it's just one he doesn't.
Which one? Let's see a minute. What did it say? A Haidah. Oinah Pruta. Haidah Pruta. Isha Pruta. V'Hanoah b'Shava Pruta. Getting the benefit of something b'Shava Pruta he doesn't count, and Shavas Aveda. So he drops two and adds two. He adds Oinah, right? And something called Yeshivas Dayanim. Yeshivas Dayanim means that the court won't convene b'Pruta. Now wait a minute. We learned elsewhere, right? Didn't we learn before? The court won't convene with less than 2 silver ma'os. So he has a different view. So Levi has a whole different view of the Chamesh Prutos, which is why he argues on the fact, and he says, it's a good kasha. The Mishnah should say, and in a Mai Tosefta, Oinah is the first case. So you see, contemporaneously, the Tana of the Mishnah, right? The Tana of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, who's collected the Mishnah, and again, he collected the Mishnahs based on the majority of the Tanoim. But Levi may have had a minority group, but nevertheless, what he said was very important. So he put all of his brises together, and we see that there's a machlokes here. So what do? We have two different views here. So how are we going to answer? So the Gemara says. So the Gemara now asks the question. Okay, so we have a list of 5 and a list of 5 with 2 distinctions in each list of 5. Frek the Gemara V'tana didon, and our Mishnah that we just learned, my Tama Lokatani Yeshivas Dayanim, why doesn't he include Yeshivas Dayanim? In other words, a good kasha. Yeshivas Dayanim is something that Levi added. So we always see in the Gemara, when you have a machlekes, you always ask the question why the other Manda Omer didn't include Yeshivas Dayanim. So he's asking here why our Tana didn't add Yeshivas Dayanim to the 5, and for the Gemara, Tonale Gezel. Because, interesting, the Gemara says, because our case includes Gezel, and that you have to have at least a Shava Pruta, and Gezel is something that can come before the court. Therefore, we infer that the court will take the case with a Shava Pruta because they'll take the case of Gezel. So in other words, we're inferring Yeshivas Dayanim from Gezel. That's how he understands it. And therefore, he says it wasn't necessary to have Yeshivas Dayanim because you have Gezel. Frek the Gemara, Omilo Tani Gezel, V'Katani Aveda. You're telling me that you don't have to have Yeshivas Dayanim because you have Gezel. But if you have Gezel, what do you need Aveda for? In other words, now we're starting to look at the individual items. If you have Gezel and you say needs a Pruta, wouldn't you think Aveda needs a Pruta? That if someone finds something that needs a Pruta, why is there any daylight between Gezel and Aveda? So in other words, we're now going, this is becoming now a rolling question. Is once you have one, you understand the other. Okay, but once you have one, then why do you need a Veda? You shouldn't have to have a Veda in Gezel because they all stem again from the same case. So, okay, so to give a proper answer, says the Gemara, Hanach Itzbechalei. Our Tana has to mention both Gezel and a Veda because of a different perspective. Gezel, if someone steals a Shava Pruta and then he might have been making, or he swears falsely, I didn't steal from you, the Mishnah gave us a chiddush that you cannot return it to a shliach, you have to return it face to face to the owner, very directly, right? Aveda, but the case of Aveda is different. Amotzi Aveda Shava Pruta, Chayv Lahachriz. A person who finds an Aveda, there's a mitzvah in the Torah of Shavas Aveda. Va'afal gaf the Gezel. Va'afal gaf the Zel. Here's the chiddush. Let's say he found an object. And from the time he finds the object, let's say a period of time goes by, and what happens if that object lessens in value? Okay? In other words, there was a depreciation of the value of the Aveda, and it's no longer worth a Pruta. Do you have to announce it or not? What do you think? Because now I don't have a Shava Pruta. I may have found a Shava Pruta, but by the time I get around to announcing it, it's not worth a Shava Pruta. There was a devaluation of all of the, it was a piece of metal, and all the metal was devalued. All of a sudden, it's not worth a Pruta. So l'chayra, he shouldn't have to announce it. Teretz is, it's telling us Aveda. If the Aveda was found as a Shava Pruta, even if it reduces in value later, then we still have to announce it. So in other words, the Tana of our Mishnah wants to explain himself different than Levi, because Levi introduced two different things from ours, and our Tana is saying no, that we need what we need because you couldn't learn it from Levi's theory, because from Levi's theory, Gzela and Aveda, you can't learn one from the other. Gzela is Gzela, you owe it. But Aveda, where there's no, I mean, it's Hashavas Aveda, but is there Hashavas Aveda? Do you have to, Hashavas Aveda, by the way, means you have to do something. It's not just Sheva Altasa. I got to announce it, I got to go to Shul, I got to go to Bezdin, whatever. So do we impose on you to do all of that? If the Aveda depreciated in value, it's not worth a Sheva Pruta. Says the Gemara, yes, we do. Because once the Aveda was a Pruta, even if it became less, then you still have to. So we'll finish the Rashis. and then we'll stop here, and the Gemara then goes a little bit further in with Levi. But at least we'll understand our situation. Begezel bepruta l'chayver carbon shvua im nishva l'shaker l'licha achov. Yeshivas hadayonim bepruta l'mishi yesh lo edim or shechayiv modeh. He admits, right? And we push off the payment. So in other words, the dayanim then are in charge, and if a person is moida, then they can evaluate the admission and see what he has to pay and what he doesn't have to pay. Okay, Tana Gezel, Mekiva the Tana Gezel, Beputa Shemamina Mamonahu Bekfina. Hana Itzrach Gezel, Lahashmiinan, the other Channel Achra. So Begezel, we have a particular reason to put it in R5 because of the question of pursuing him to Madai. So that opens up a whole different situation. So Gezel has to be one of the 5, right? But why does Aveda have to be? Why does Aveda have to be? Says the Gemara, Aveda has to be in order to teach us that once the Aveda is a pruta, even if it depreciates to less than a shava pruta, you still have to return it. Okay, so at least at this point, we have a machlokes between our Tana and Levi, and according to our Tana, we have a list of 5, and according to Levi, we have a list of 5. Levi's question about Ono is now not answered because is now not a question because you hold like Rav Tuvia, who said that there is Ono b'prutos, so therefore Ono doesn't have to be included. And the reason why Yeshivas Hadayanim doesn't have to be included is because Yeshivas Hadayanim we learn from Gezel, and just like Gezel is a pruta, is a minimum of a pruta, so Yeshivas Hadayanim is at least a minimum of a pruta. So, okay, so these 2 lists will come into discussion again, but at least now we see that what the trend of our Mishnah and Gemara is, that we're trying to understand in great detail where the responsibilities are and what the thresholds are. And again, it's a fascinating discussion because when we look at our contemporary society and we see where we've come, we have to apply these halachas to us. So in other words, here we are in the 21st century, and we're dealing with halachas that 20 centuries ago, but still are germane from the standpoint of halacha l'maisa, is that except you have to massage them and understand them, how they apply to us, but you can't say, oh, that applied to a different society, a different time, a different place. And see all the questions about valuations, these are all fascinating discussions. Some of them pertain to the time, and some of them we have to understand how that halacha pertains now to many of our complicated commercial transactions, and how the halacha applies. So in any event, we'll stop here, and next week the whole discussion with Levi continues on. We'll go back to it.